economics, which was a more advanced class covering somewhat of similar material. Now, when I started economics, it sounded at first like a great idea. I thought, I'm finally going to be able to learn all about what happens with the Federal Reserve and with interest rates, so that I can give a good extemp speech like Ryan and talk to you about Jim Bob's taco stand and other such very important things. However, while economics did indeed sound like a good idea at the beginning, the more I got used to it, the more I started to think, you know, this was really a dumb idea. Economics was not a fun class. It was boring. There was a lot of work involved. There was a 6-page research project involved at the end of the year. And in the end, it proved out to be a poor decision on my part. Now, Tom Bodette once said, just because raw cow manure is wrapped in a pretty box doesn't mean it don't stink. His words ring true. Because basically what they mean is that things are often more than they seem. Bodette's words are true for two main reasons. First of all, that our first impressions are usually incorrect. And secondly, that judging on things on their appearances is often wrong. Now, the first reason we should look at why Tom Bodette's words are true is that our first impressions are usually incorrect. We can see this through two main examples. One, from the Lerner and Lowe musical Brigadoon, and second, from former President George Bush. Now, in Brigadoon, there's an interesting development that exists in that a small Scottish town called Brigadoon, on account of a miracle with God, appears for only one day every 100 years. Now, by some strange stroke of luck, two American hunters, Tommy and Jeff, happen to stroll into Brigadoon on the one day during the century that the town is indeed there. Now, when the two first get into the town, they have a bad first impression. They see people that are from a time hundreds of years ago where they are not modern 20th century hunters. Therefore, their first impression was that this town is full of loonies, since they don't understand that they only appear every 100 years. They made a judgment based on their first impression, but indeed, they were incorrect. They came to realize that Brigadoon did indeed have good people, and that it was a good tie to their past. And, for Tommy at least, he found something in Brigadoon he could find nowhere else: true love. Now, the second example we should look at of why our first impressions are usually incorrect can be seen in former President George Bush. Now, in Bush's first 2 years in office, he did indeed do a lot of great things. Now, the one that sticks forward in most of our minds is the success he had in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm in limiting Saddam Hussein and keeping him back in Iraq where he belonged, instead of invading nearby Kuwait. Now, if we had just based our impression of George Bush on what we saw during the first 2 years of his presidency, we would have thought that, hey, this guy's a pretty good president. However, in the next 2 years, once the various ongoing overseas tended to die down, Bush showed his true colors, and we saw that his domestic policy wasn't all that it could be. Now, if we had made a first impression on George Bush, again, things would have been much different than they turned out in the end. But our first impression in this situation was indeed wrong. Now, the second reason why the quotation, just because cow manure comes wrapped in a pink box, don't mean it don't stink, is true, is that often in life, judging on appearances alone is wrong. Now, we can see this through the assistant coach for the DeKalb High School forensics team, Tony Cimino. Now, for those of you who know Tony Cimino, you will realize that his outward appearance is not exactly what we would call, top of the line. When Tony shows up for coaching sessions, unlike Mr. Solomon, who's usually in a shirt and tie, Tony comes dressed in sweatpants and an ugly plaid shirt that has absolutely no color coordination with everything else that he's wearing. Now, if we were to make an assumption on Tony Cimino based only on his outward appearance, much like we might judge the cow manure by the box that it comes in, we might think that Tony Cimino was in fact not a good coach, not a good person, and wouldn't be beneficial for us at all. However, as many of us have known, including myself, Kristen, and Ryan Conboy, who have had the pleasure of working with Tony for a long time, we can see that we can't judge a person just on their appearance, because Tony Cimino is indeed an excellent public speaker, an excellent coach, and someone who has helped us in many ways. Now, the second example we should look at of why judging people on their appearances is wrong, or judging people on the final outcome of what they do is wrong, is the 1995 Forensics Regional Team. Now, as Mr. Solomon briefly described for us earlier this evening, it's a difficult time of year, because we have a team of almost 50 people, and in the end, we have to narrow it down to one person in each event. Now, if one were to look at some of the people who didn't make the regional team, and simply to think that just because they didn't make the team, they had a bad season, they would be indeed judging a person on a type of appearance. But if we look a little further, we can look at people who set individual goals, and just because they didn't make the final team in the end, doesn't mean that they didn't have a successful season, but rather that they set their goals for themselves and achieved them on their own personal level. It's this kind of achievement and this kind of success that we need to focus on, and not whether or not someone else says we do a good job. Today, we've examined the quotation, "Just because cow manure comes wrapped in a pink box doesn't mean it don't stink." We've seen that the words really mean that things are often more than they seem, and seen that it's true because our first impressions are often incorrect, and that also we can't judge people on appearances alone. So think of some instances in your own life where you might be presented with a type of cow manure. Any type thing you get in your life that you think you don't like. Hopefully you'll realize that just because a thing can seem like one thing on the outside, unless we take the time to truly familiarize ourselves with what we have there, we'll never get a true understanding of what it is. And many times in life, unless we take the time to get to know it, we'll never be happy. But if we do take that time, if we do more closely examine our difficulties in life, we can find out that things aren't often as bad as they seem. And only then can we truly be happy.